BMW, Saab, and Audi challenged the establishment. Now they are the establishment, and they face a challenge. Merkur XR4Ti from Germany. XR4Ti, the sports sedan from Lincoln Mercury that isn't afraid of a little competition. Test drive XR4Ti at a Lincoln Mercury Merkur dealer.
Introduced to the European public in 1982 and continuing on through 1993, the Ford Sierra was a marked departure from the Ford Taunus and Cortina that it replaced. The Sierra was a car that was really designed to be a highly aerodynamic, stylish vehicle in the vein of the Ford Probe 3 that was introduced at the 1981 Frankfurt Auto Show. The Sierra was designed by Uwe Bonson and Patrick Lecomont and was really spearheaded by Bob Lutz, who was president of Ford Europe at the time. Although the car sold relatively well in Germany and France upon its initial debut, it took a little while for the British public to warm up to the vehicle, perhaps because they loved their dearly departed Taunus and Cortina so much. In any case, it ended up being one of the longest-lived platforms that was produced by Ford, lasting from 1982 all the way through till 1993 in production. Now, after a few model years, Ford president and then chairman Bob Lutz had an idea that he could export these Ford Sierras over to the United States, where some discerning car fanatics perhaps would end up buying them. After all, other European automakers, VW, Audi, Mercedes, BMW, were all exporting vehicles to the United States, and at the time, it was a way to really improve profitability. The US dollar was relatively strong, the Deutsche Mark was relatively weak, and as a result, every vehicle sold in the US came with a pretty hefty profit. Thus, Lutz ended up pushing Ford to start importing the Ford Sierras in the United States, and of course, a new name had to be put on the vehicles because they couldn't be sold as Fords, it would confuse the American public. And so the name Merkur was born. Merkur was German for Mercury, and the vehicles would be sold through Lincoln Mercury dealers. This was not what Lutz had originally intended or envisioned, however, for the vehicle. In fact, when he was originally pitching the vehicle to Ford management, Lutz saw that these now Merkurs would actually be sold through other dealers, non-Ford dealers, in partnership, as an example, with Volvo and Mazda, so that they could reach the right customer. Unfortunately, Ford management thought that Lincoln Mercury division really needed a win at this time and another product in the showroom, and so the Ford Sierra went to Lincoln Mercury showrooms as the Merkur, a car that many people in the U.S. just didn't even know how to pronounce. I think I've heard Merkur more often than Merkur, as an example. Another issue that the Merkur had was that Ford management refused to employ a differing ad agency from Lincoln Mercury's typical ad agency, and you can imagine that the marketing folks who were used to selling town cars and Grand Marquis just weren't used to selling a rear-wheel drive European-style sedan or coupe, especially one with a turbocharged engine like the XR4Ti. This led to a series of missteps by the marketing team, including publishing ads that really weren't all that exciting, including one that had the Merkur XR4Ti, and underneath it said Bavarian Scream. The funny thing about this was that the car wasn't produced anywhere near Bavaria. In fact, it was produced in Cologne. Bavaria is a region of Germany in the south of Germany, and Cologne is nowhere near it. But the ad agency didn't necessarily understand that and really didn't care. So unfortunately, the Merkur was hatched with kind of a half-hearted plan to give it to Lincoln Mercury dealers with Lincoln Mercury advertising, and you can imagine that the dealers just didn't know what to do with this car, and consequently, it really was a failure for Ford. Moreover, another failure of the car was that by the time it launched, the exchange rate had flipped from a strong US dollar to a weak US dollar, and thus it was getting very expensive for Ford to end up selling these Merkurs, and as a consequence, the entry-level price of the XR4Ti, which was introduced for the 1985 model year, was $16,500. To put that into context in today's dollar terms, that's almost $50,000 for this XR4 Ti. It's hard to imagine that people were going to pay $50,000 for a rear-wheel drive, two-door coupe with a turbocharged 2.3-liter four-cylinder engine under hood. Some of that cost also had to go to assembling the Merkur at Carmen because Ford couldn't produce it on its own assembly lines because the Sierra was selling relatively well by this standpoint. So they had to contract Carmen to produce the XR4 Ti for the U.S. market. Ford originally projected sales around 15 to 20,000 units per year. However, in the first 2 years, the XR4 Ti ended up selling about 12,500 units on average per year. It was eventually sunset after the 1989 model year when the U.S. dollar increasingly weakened and the sales by this point of the XR4 Ti were really just not enough to justify continuing the importation of the vehicle. Now, I have to say that there is another side of the story too, and that is that Ford actually ended up introducing another model in the Merkur lineup, the Merkur Scorpio. Pretty sweet vehicle. And this was based on the Ford Granada that was sold in the UK. The Scorpio was sold in the US from the 1988 to 1989 model years. It had a very short life. It was manufactured in Cologne, and about 22,000 examples were imported. The Scorpio was sold as a 5-door hatchback, and it was powered by a 2.9-liter, 144 horsepower V6. In fact, it was the same V6 that was found under hood in the Ford Ranger and Bronco 2. Could be paired with a V6 as well as a 4-speed automatic overdrive transmission. Now, Scorpio had a number of cool features, including a power reclining rear seat as well as individually adjustable seats up front that had air bladders that you could squeeze this little ball and pump them up to get a more sporty feeling seat as the air pockets were inflated as you squeezed the bulb. And if you thought the XR4 Ti was an expensive Merkur, wait till you hear the base pricing of the Scorpio. The base price of the Scorpio at its launch was $23,390. That's equivalent to about $64,000 in today's terms. If you got the automatic transmission and the touring package, which most of the vehicles were equipped with, the price raised to about $26,500, or roughly $71,000 to $72,000 today. Can you imagine $71,000 for this particular vehicle? It's basically the same price as a Lincoln Town Car. You can imagine that dealers had a hard time identifying customers for these vehicles. They just didn't have customers in their call sheets that wanted these Merkurs, especially because those customers were driving Mercury, Grand Marquis, Lincoln Town Car, Lincoln Continental, these relatively floaty boat type things. And as a result, the Scorpio as well as the XR4 Ti were gone after the 1989 model year. And the Scorpio ended up selling roughly around 20,000 units over the course of its entire run. So success was not something that ended up coming to the Merkur lineup. And it's too bad because the cars actually were pretty fun to drive. I've driven an XR4 Ti, and it was quite a bit of fun. Unfortunately, the one that I drove was an automatic. If you're going to get one, get the 5-speed manual transmission. You get a bit more power when you have the 5-speed because it has an intercooler for the turbo. The automatic is a bit detuned. In any case, success, as I mentioned, did not come, but let's learn a little bit more about the Merkur and what some of the challenges were firsthand from Bob Lutz himself, the individual who championed bringing the Ford Sierra and Granada stateside as the Merkur. Here's Bob. Now, you eventually brought that stateside as the Merkur as well. What was your thought process on that?
The thought process was get exports for Ford of Europe, because one of the reasons all the other European manufacturers were profitable and we weren't, or not as profitable as we should be, is they exported to the States. So I thought, well, what we should do is establish a separate marketing channel, basically not ally it with one of the Ford brands like Mercury, Lincoln, or Ford in the US, have a standalone Ford import division and import these things. Don't try to set up a unique dealer network, but instead duel with brands like Mazda, Porsche, Volvo, Saab, basically premium or semi-premium Japanese brands and semi-premium European brands. And for instance, there would have been very little conflict between, say, Volvo and Merkur. But everybody decided, no, that's too much fixed costs. We'll give it to Mercury. And I said, well, there's the kiss of death. And it was.
Hence Merkur.
Yeah, well, nobody knew how to market it. And I mean, I still remember one XR4Ti ad that the headline was Bavarian Scream. And I said, guys, it's not made in Bavaria. It's made in Cologne. Oh, Cologne isn't Bavaria?
A different area of Germany.
We thought Bavaria was another name for Germany. No, Bavaria is a region in Germany. But the ad ran, and it was, and nobody was. This car was not going to succeed unless it was focused to car guys. Because it was basically, performance-wise, very close to the Audi Quattro.
And I think in stateside they put the 2.3-liter Turbo 4 in it.
It was a 2.3-liter Turbo 4, which we had gotten all of the noise and vibration out of. I mean, that was one vibrating engine because it was 2.3 liters with no balance shafts. So that thing at high RPM, it shook. But we were able to calm it down to where that engine was silky smooth all the way up to 6,000 RPM. And it was well turbocharged. The car was fast for its day, handled well, and deserved marketing with copy written by automotive professionals. Like, I could have seen David E. Davis write the copy for it. And it would have been an import niche car, and instead it was going to go through Lincoln Mercury dealers who are the last people in the world who know how to sell an import.
And then I think, so there was the XR4Ti, there was also the Scorpio, the
Yeah.
four-door.
Which was even better.
It's a good-looking car.
Yeah, well, good looking, a great automobile to drive.
I think it also had reclining rear seats, if I recall correctly,
Yep.
which was
Yep.
super unique for the period.
Well, it was car of the year in Europe, and it was, hugely successful.
But was that, so once you heard that it was going to be sold through the Lincoln Town Car Mercury Grand Marquis sales channel,
That was the kiss of death.
you knew at that point that it
But it was not that people were evil, they just didn't understand. And you could talk to them till they were blue in the face. You're talking to people who say, well, we owe the Lincoln Mercury dealers one, and it's cheaper, and it's the existing organization, et cetera, et cetera. All rational arguments that made all the sense in the world, except you knew it wasn't going to work.
That must be painful, just sitting back and knowing that it's not going to work, and there's not really much that you can do about it, I guess, at that
Well,
point.
you see, win some, lose some, and some get rained out, so it comes with the territory. You can't win them all.
We talked about Merkur, which I don't think you've really ever talked about much.
No, we haven't, no.
And
But I still get letters from the Merkur Owners Club.
you do?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
It's a dedicated, I almost bought an XR4Ti, but it was an automatic, and I think the automatic was reduced horsepower versus the manual, and I couldn't do it without having it through the manual transmission.
You needed the 5-speed.
So I passed on it, but Oh well. I told the Merkur story, I don't think really before.
No, I didn't because I consider it a failure.
Do you mind that we talk about it?
No, I mean, the car basically didn't work, and I got blamed for that. I think I got blamed because the execution was bad. There was the wrong marketing channel, the wrong dealers. Oh, even the wrong. I said, okay, all right, let Mercury have it. But
you acquiesced on the Mercury thing.
well, once the decision was made, I stopped. Okay, Mercury can have it. That's fine. But could we at least have a different advertising agency? No. So it was the same advertising agency that did the town cars and all the other Mercury, the Grand Marquis and everything. There wasn't a car guy in that agency. Nobody knew how to address the automotive enthusiast. And the copy in the ads was embarrassing to a car guy. You know, thrilled to the rush of turbo acceleration and all kinds of stuff that the car guy really likes to read.
I mean, the XR4Ti was a good-looking one. I really liked the Scorpio sedan. I thought that was a handsome-looking car.
It was, yeah.
But those never really took off for the reasons that
nobody put any marketing money behind it either. I mean, it was like a confidential brand.
But to your point, that's one of those issues where the dealer body, like who's the call list that they're going to call up, right? Can you imagine a Lincoln Mercury dealer and a salesperson there trying to activate sales on a Merkur?
They can't do it. It's like, I remember when, in '62, I was just finishing grad school, 61, finishing grad school at UC Berkeley, and I lived out in Walnut Creek, and I won a Kaiser Foundation grant in aid, $2,000, which is like $20,000 now. And I said, well, I have no financial hardship. And they said, this isn't about financial hardship. It's about being an outstanding student and likely to succeed and likely to make the institution proud. I said, wow, well, I mean, I'm living okay. I'll take the money, but I don't really need it. Is it okay if I buy a car with it? And they said, hey, Kaiser Foundation wants to have you for lunch, and they'll hand you the check, and they don't care what you spend the money on. So I went, had the lunch, got the check, and immediately went to my local Chevrolet dealer in Berkeley, California, to buy a Corvair Monza.
Oh, the turbo.
No, that was before the turbo. This was, the Monza had 102 horsepower, 4-speed manual transmission.
61, yeah.
Yeah, well, I was 61 year, but it was 62 model, so it was a 62. Beautiful autumn gold with autumn gold vinyl interior, 4 on the floor with a white shifter knob. It was a wonderful car. I tried to talk the Chevy salesman into selling me a Corvair, and the guy just wouldn't do it. He said, son, you're not going to be happy with this. Here, let me show you this Impala.
The Impala, yeah.
It's got an automatic transmission, it's got a vinyl roof, it's got a V8 engine, it's only slightly more expensive than the Corvair, and with the payments, I can make it. I said, I don't want an Impala. And I finally gave up, and I was a member of the MG Car Club, and a key pillar in the MG Car Club was a guy who had a dealership out in the valley beyond Walnut Creek. He had a Chevy dealership, but he was a European sports car guy, especially MG. And I talked to him, and he said, hell, I'll get you the car you want. And he did. So I had my Corvair Monza, but that was another one where the retail establishment just absolutely did not understand the car.
We'll close out now with one final commercial for the Merkur, this time the Scorpio. Thanks again for watching.
It learned to run in the Black Forest of Germany. But unlike others, it also learned to be nice to people. Scorpio, the German sedan that's comfortable without forgetting what it learned in the forest. Scorpio, German performance you can be comfortable with at select Lincoln Mercury dealers.